Hey, welcome back to the channel. Um, if this is your first time, welcome. I'm Derek. This is Chocolate CD Tech. Today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be covering. I'm going to give you 5 tips. I'm calling it the do's and don'ts of tips for aspiring web developers and also junior devs as well. So let's get right into it. Tip number one: don't run out and buy a MacBook just because someone said it's good for development. I heard a lot of people on different blogs and Reddit or whatever, telling other people, yeah, go grab a MacBook. Now, if you don't have a Mac, if you don't have a laptop or development machine in general, and this is going to be your first time, then sure. And if you have the money for it, why not? But I wouldn't run to get it just because of maybe the command line or the bash line, because obviously that's available in Linux. Um, Also, you could get a used version if you wanted to, but I wouldn't run out and grab a brand new one. Um, Speaking of Windows support for Linux, if you've never heard of Windows Subsystem for Linux, um, let me actually introduce you real quick. So this is Windows subsystem for Linux. And as you can see, obviously this is just the installation guide. And what this does is, this might be a little too much. And what this does is essentially, helps you install um, a support for basically being able to run Linux in Windows. And what that looks like is this. Well, not quite this. So what I actually have here, and you don't have to use this, I'm just using it because that's what I have right now. This is Windows new terminal, which is essentially a new version of, I guess, PowerShell. And you can customize it, do a whole bunch of stuff with it. It's actually pretty nice. I just started working with it not too long ago. So anyway, so what I wanted to show you is that with using this specifically, and you don't have to use this, you can just use regular Windows command line, command prompt, as it's called. Um, and what you can do is, for me, I can just have, once you go through the installation instruction that you went to, um, at one point in time, you're going to be able to install a Linux distro of your choice. In my case, I just chose to install Ubuntu. And obviously, you can install whatever you want. There's no, you don't have to install the same thing I installed. So essentially, this is Linux. Pretty much any command or anything you want to do in Linux, you can do it here, and it's actually pretty cool. And just to prove to you, this is Linux. Release, right? So yeah, this is Linux. So anyway, you can actually do some really nice development with this. And what I'm showing you is actually how to combine um, VS Code with what we just installed, that WSL. It makes for a really, really nice development environment. So if you are chasing after Mac just for the Bash system or something, then don't do that. Number two, don't get caught up in what I refer to as the language wars, right? This is where you start looking for, obviously you knew, you don't know which one to start with, and you ask around, someone says, go for Python, go for JavaScript, go for this, and so on and so forth. And you started here and then you keep moving back and forth. Don't get caught up in that. Pick one that interests you. Maybe if you want it, if you didn't know at first, maybe just take a look, maybe watch a video or two, but don't overdo it. Watch one or two videos on one of them or a few, and decide, okay, just based on this alone, I'm gonna take a look at it. Because the reality is, regardless of what you choose as your first language, it's not going to be your last. The concepts that you do learn, however, are going to be able to translate into another. Now, obviously, if you learn something like Elixir or let's say Clojure or something like that, and then you move on to some C type syntax language like Python or C# or Java, obviously the paradigm is going to be different, because one is you're going to be moving from functional to object oriented. So yeah, something's going to be different. But the reality is, once you learn the concept of a for loop, it's a for loop, right? So my recommendation would be something that's a little bit simpler, so that you can not just simpler, but you can also get help quickly, right? So if you pick something like Python, JavaScript, C#, Java even, um, there's just a lot of information out there, right? Next, then pick an IDE, right? Pick a text editor. Doesn't really matter. You want to pick one once again that has good support, so that if when you run into issues, you can get help, right? So pick one. My recommendation at this point would probably be something like VS Code if you're gonna be, it's got really good support. Atom is pretty good. Um, you can choose Sublime, but don't, because it's 2020 and Sublime is so 2013 or something. No, I'm kidding. If you have Sublime, use it. Um, Number three, don't get caught up in tutorial hell. Right? This is essentially when you watch one video, you watch another video, you read maybe a blog, you read another blog, and you keep reading, keep writing, keep watching, and you basically don't do anything. The reality is when you're watching and reading, and you're not, let's say for instance, you're not writing, you're not coding, that stuff is not getting in your head. You might think it is, but the reality is it is not. So get out there and actually do something. Pick a project. You want something that's not too easy so that you don't get bored. You don't want something that's too hard because then you might quit. Pick something that's of interest, right? Um, Pick something that's of interest. That would be my best advice. Next tip. Similar to getting caught in the language wars, do not get caught up in the framework wars. This sort of goes along the same way, right? Oh, should I use Vue for my front end? Should I use Angular? Should I use, I don't know, Svelte? Should I use Nest.js? Should I use React, and so on and so forth, right? Well, if you're using Nest.js, you're using React, but you get the point. Um, doesn't really matter. That what you care about is your fundamentals. Don't get caught up in the framework wars, because frameworks come and go. Once upon a time, we all used jQuery, and then we didn't. And then once upon a time, we all wanted to use AngularJS because it was a new hot kit. And then now it's React. I'm hearing a lot of talk about Svelte. Who knows what's next? So if you start by chasing the framework as opposed to really understanding how to write code in JavaScript, that's not going to be good, right? First of all, you find yourself always struggling because you don't really understand what that framework is even based on, right? So focus on the language, forget about the framework, because you can get up and going pretty quickly, whichever you choose. All right, so that's gonna be it. Let's wrap it up. So number one, don't run out and buy a new MacBook. You can get a used one. If you already have a Windows machine, use that and possibly install Subsystem for Linux if you're chasing after the terminal, the bash command. Um, Although actually there's a whole bunch of other things you can download that will help you do similar stuff. Number two, don't get caught up in the language wars. Pick a language. Doesn't really matter, because in the end, guess what? It won't be your last language. I guarantee you. The fundamentals you learn in one will, for the most part, translate easily to another one. It's just going to come down to syntax. That's all. Pick an IDE. The reason I say pick an IDE is because when you pick one and you stick to it, you don't have to worry about switching context too much. So you can focus on one, learn one, and be better at it, and it makes you more productive. Four, right? All right. Four, don't get caught in tutorial hell. Don't go back and forth. Get one or two items. If you prefer books, grab a book. But best advice is to build something. That is absolutely the best way to grow your knowledge. Pick a project, start coding. All right. Ask questions. All right. There's a whole lot of information out there. And the bonus one is learn to communicate. Right. You have to learn to communicate. The reality is you could be the best programmer in the world, but if you can't communicate with your product managers, if you can't communicate with your clients, it doesn't matter what sort of code you're putting out there. It it almost trumps. I know it might sound crazy, but it almost trumps your ability to be the best programmer out there if you cannot communicate. So, and also communication helps you be a better programmer because you get to learn what your clients really want and not just building stuff because you think that's cool. All right. All right. So see you in the next one.